The morning I heard my son Marcus say, "By the time she gets back from that church, it'll already be done, and what is she gonna do about it?" From the other side of my own kitchen wall, I did not move. I did not breathe. I just stood there in my own hallway, still holding my Bible and my good church purse, and I finally understood everything. Everything. All of it, every strange phone call he took outside. Every document he asked me to sign that he said was just routine. Every time he told me I was confused, that I was remembering wrong, that I needed to slow down and let him handle things. I understood it all in that one sentence. And I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a woman who falls apart. I am not a woman who screams or begs or crumbles in a hallway. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. Then I took one quiet breath, turned around, and walked back out the front door the same way I had come in. I did not let the screen door slam behind me. My name is Dorothy Elaine Watkins. I am 64 years old. I live on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio, in a neighborhood called Cam's Corners, where the streets still have big oak trees that meet overhead in the summer and make the whole block feel like a tunnel of green. I have lived on this side of Cleveland my entire adult life, and I know every face on my street by name. For 31 years, I worked as a legal assistant at a small firm on Lorraine Avenue, Hendricks and Pryor, family law and estate planning. I prepared documents, organized case files, and sat across the table from clients during some of the hardest moments of their lives. I knew what a quitclaim deed looked like. I knew what a power of attorney could and could not do. I knew the difference between being protected and only believing you were protected. That knowledge sat in the back of my mind every day for 31 years, and I truly thought, that it would keep me safe. I bought my house in 1999. It is a brick 2-story on Crestwood Road with a bay window in the front room and a radiator in the upstairs hallway that clicks 3 times before it comes on every winter morning, a sound so familiar I stopped hearing it years ago, the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. I paid $87,000 for that house. I paid every mortgage payment myself. I paid off the last one in 2019, and I sat at my kitchen table that afternoon with the paid-in-full letter in my hands, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from the specific relief of a thing finally, fully belonging to you. My husband Reginald passed in 2014. A stroke on a Wednesday afternoon in October in the parking lot of the Home Depot on Ridge Road. He had gone to get weather stripping for the back door. He never made it inside the store. We had been married 26 years, and I will tell you the truest thing about losing him, which is not that I fell apart, it is that the house got louder after he was gone. All the small sounds I had never noticed before became enormous. The radiator. The refrigerator hum. The way my own footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor, going from room to empty room. I still walk 2 miles every Tuesday and Thursday morning before the neighborhood fully wakes up. I have done it for 11 years, and I have not missed a single week. But somewhere along the way, something had started to change, and I had been too trusting, too willing to believe that love made people safe, to see it clearly. My son Marcus is 38 years old. He is my only child, and for most of his life, that fact made me proud in a way that is hard to explain to people who have more than one. When you only have one, everything concentrates. All your hope, all your watching, all your worry. Marcus is a tall man, broad across the shoulders the way Reginald was, and he has his father's habit of tilting his head slightly to the left when he is listening to you, or when he wants you to think he is. He has a good smile. He has always had a good smile, the kind that arrived just a half-second too late, the way a door closes after someone has already looked inside. About 2 years before all of this happened, Marcus lost his job at the logistics company where he had worked for nearly a decade. He told me it was downsizing. He moved back into the house for what he said would be 3 months, maybe 4, while he got back on his feet. He brought 2 suitcases and a box of shoes, and he was still there 18 months later. I told myself he was grieving his father still. I told myself everyone heals on their own timeline. I told myself that this was what mothers do, they hold the door open. They hold it open and they wait. I should have paid closer attention to the way he sometimes watched me from across a room, not with love, but with something that looked like calculation. I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. And then came the Sunday morning I now think of as the last day of my old life, though I did not know it yet when I put on my good blue dress, picked up my Bible, and walked out my front door to catch the 9:15 service at Greater Harvest Baptist. I had forgotten my offering envelope. I turned around 3 blocks from home. The first wrong thing had actually happened 6 weeks before that Sunday morning. I had just not let myself name it yet. It was a Thursday evening in late February. I had come downstairs around 9 o'clock to get a glass of water, and Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and his phone face down beside it, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the way he closed the laptop when he heard me on the stairs. Not slowly, the way you close something you were simply finished with. Quickly. The way you close something you were not finished with but did not want seen. I asked him what he was working on. He said nothing, just some job applications, just some stuff. He said it twice, just some stuff. I poured my water. I stood at the sink for a moment looking out at the backyard, at the motion sensor light casting a pale yellow square on the dead February grass. I asked if he had eaten. He said he was fine. I said goodnight and went back upstairs. I lay in bed for a while after that, looking at the ceiling, listening to the radiator click 3 times and come on. I told myself that a grown man was entitled to his privacy at his own mother's kitchen table. I told myself I was being suspicious of nothing. But I did not fully sleep that night. And I noticed the next morning that the filing cabinet in the small room I used as an office, the one where I kept my deed, my insurance papers, my Reginald's death certificate, was not pushed all the way closed. It was open just a half inch, just enough to notice if you were looking. I had left it closed. I always left it closed. I pushed it shut. I did not say anything, but I could not quite let it go. The pattern became clear over the following 3 weeks, and it did not announce itself loudly. It arrived the way cold comes into an old house, not through one obvious gap, but through a dozen small places at once until you realize the whole room has changed temperature. First, there was a phone call. I picked up the kitchen extension before I realized Marcus was already on the line in his room, and I heard a man's voice I did not recognize say, "The only issue is whether she's listed as co-owner or sole owner, because that changes the whole approach." I heard Marcus say, "I'm handling that." I set the phone down very carefully. Then there was the afternoon he brought papers to the kitchen table and set them in front of me with a pen, telling me it was a form for his health insurance, that he needed me to verify his address since he was still using Crestwood Road as his permanent residence. The form had more lines than a health insurance document needed. I told him I would look it over later. He said it was time sensitive. I said I understood, and I picked it up and took it upstairs with me, and I read every line of it in the light from my bedroom window. It was not a health insurance form. It was a document that, if signed, would have added Marcus as a joint owner of my property. I folded that paper in half. Then I folded it again. Then I put it in the drawer of my nightstand, underneath my devotional and my reading glasses, with the things I had not yet decided what to do with. The third thing was a conversation at dinner, 1 week after that. Marcus was talking about the neighborhood, about the houses selling nearby, about how the market was doing. He said, almost casually, almost like it was not the point he had been building toward for 10 minutes, "You ever think about what you want to do with this house, Mama? Long term, I mean." I looked at him across the table. I said, "I want to live in it, Marcus. That's what I want to do with it." He smiled, that half-second smile. He said, "No, I just mean it's a lot of house for one person. I'm just thinking about what's practical." I put my fork down on the edge of my plate. I did not say what I was thinking. I said I was tired, and I cleared the dishes. The kitchen smelled like the pot roast I had made, and underneath it something else, something that had no smell but that I felt in my chest, settled and cold and waiting. The night I knew for certain was a Tuesday. It was after 11 o'clock. Marcus had gone out and told me he would be back late. I was not trying to investigate. I want to be clear about that. I got up for water, the same as always, and I saw that he had left his jacket on the kitchen chair, and a folded paper had slipped halfway out of the inside pocket. I stood there in the kitchen in my housecoat and my slippers on the cold tile floor. I looked at that paper for a long moment. Then I unfolded it. It was a printout, an email between Marcus and a man named Gerald Tate, who identified himself in his signature line as a real estate acquisitions consultant. The email was dated 11 days prior. In it, Marcus described the property at my address. He described the square footage. He described the lot. He wrote, and I am going to tell you his exact words because I have read them enough times that they are permanent in me now. "Owner is elderly and not fully aware of her options. We can move forward as discussed once the title issue is resolved." Elderly. Not fully aware. I stood at that kitchen table until the refrigerator cycled off and the house went completely quiet. I folded the paper back the way I had found it. I slid it back into the jacket pocket. I went back upstairs. I did not sleep. I lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling, and I understood that I had not been imagining things. I had been right all along. And now I had to decide what a woman who has been right all along actually does next. I did not confront Marcus the next morning. I made coffee. I said good morning. I moved through my own kitchen like nothing had shifted, though everything had shifted, though the floor I was standing on was entirely different ground than it had been the week before. That afternoon, while Marcus said he was going to the gym, I drove to the offices of a woman named Renee Caldwell, an attorney I had known professionally for many years through my work at Hendricks and Pryor. I did not call ahead. I sat in her waiting room for 40 minutes. When she saw me, she said, "Dorothy, what's happened?" I set the folded paper I had photographed with my phone on her desk. I said, "I need you to tell me exactly where I stand and exactly what I can do." She read it twice. Then she looked up at me over her reading glasses and she said, "Good thing you came in." I had worked beside lawyers for 31 years. I knew how to read a room. The way she said those 4 words told me that whatever Marcus had already set in motion, I had not arrived too late. But I had not arrived with much time to spare either. The Sunday morning, I walked back through my own front door and heard Marcus on the phone in my kitchen. I did not make a sound. I stood in the hallway. The hardwood floor was cold through my good church shoes. The house smelled like coffee and something else, aftershave, and underneath it, the particular smell of a plan already in motion. Marcus was standing at the kitchen counter with his back to the hallway door. His phone was pressed to his ear. He was speaking in a low, even voice, the voice he used when he thought no one could hear him. He said, "Gerald, I'm telling you, by noon today it's done. She's at church until at least 12:30, she never leaves early. I've got the locksmith coming at 10:30. Once the locks are changed, I just need her to understand that the practical thing, the sensible thing, is to let me manage the property going forward." A pause. "She'll be upset at first, yeah, but she'll come around. She always comes around." I stood there. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed slowly outside. "He always comes around." I took one breath. Then I walked back out the front door, down the porch steps, and sat in my car at the curb. I did not start the engine. I called Renee Caldwell. It was not yet 9 in the morning on a Sunday, and she answered on the 3rd ring because I had told her 3 days prior that this weekend might be the weekend. I said, "He's doing it this morning." She said, "I'll make the call. You know what to do next." I did know. I had known for 11 days. What Marcus did not know, what Gerald Tate did not know, what the locksmith who arrived at my house at 10:27 that morning did not know, was that 3 days after I visited Renee Caldwell's office, she had filed an emergency motion to place a protective legal notice on the title of my property. What that meant, in plain language, was this: no transfer, no encumbrance, no change of any legal significance could be made to that property without the court's knowledge. The lock on my front door could be changed. That was just hardware. But the house itself had already been made untouchable. I sat in my car 2 blocks away at the corner of Crestwood and Lorraine, and I watched the locksmith's white van pull up to my house. I watched him go inside with Marcus. I watched him come back out 40 minutes later. I watched the van leave. Then I drove to my neighbor Cynthia's house 3 streets over, where I had arranged to meet 2 people, Renee Caldwell and a man named Detective Aaron Mobley from the Cleveland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, who had been briefed on the situation 48 hours prior. I sat at Cynthia's kitchen table, and I drank a cup of coffee that was too strong and tasted like the best thing I had ever had in my life. And that is when Renee told me the part of the story I had not yet known. Gerald Tate was not a real estate acquisitions consultant the way a person might normal. Why use that phrase? Renee had spent 11 days pulling on that thread. What she found was this: Gerald Tate had been involved in 3 prior property cases in Cuyahoga County alone, all following the same pattern. An adult child, a financially pressured adult child, makes contact with Tate. Tate identifies the property. Tate coaches the adult child on how to obtain either a forged signature, a coerced signature, or a power of attorney obtained under false pretenses from an elderly parent. The property is then either refinanced, with equity extracted, or transferred outright and sold quickly. In 2 of those 3 prior cases, the parent had not discovered what happened until the house was already gone. In one of those cases, the parent was a 67-year-old woman on the east side of Cleveland named Arlene Moss, who had lost a home she had owned for 22 years and was currently living with a niece in Garfield Heights. I want you to sit with that for a moment. A 67-year-old woman, 22 years, gone. And my son with his good smile and his father's shoulders and his half-second late expressions, had gone to that same man and said, "Here is my mother, here is her house, here is how we get it." The coffee went cold in my hands. I sat very still, and I understood that what I had thought was a problem between a mother and her son was something larger and more deliberate than I had allowed myself to believe. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I walked back into my own house. Marcus was in the living room. He was sitting in the armchair near the bay window, Reginald's chair, with his phone in his hand, and when he heard my key in the lock, he looked up with an expression I can only describe as a man recalculating. The new key worked for him, it did not work for me. I had used the spare I kept in Cynthia's kitchen drawer, the one that had been there for 12 years, the one Marcus had not thought to account for. That was the one thing he forgot. The afternoon light came through the bay window flat and white. The radiator was silent. The house smelled like the coffee Marcus had made and the outside air I had brought in on my coat. Renee Caldwell came through the door behind me. Detective Mobley came through the door behind her. Marcus stood up from his father's chair. I set my Bible and my good church purse on the side table by the door, the same place I had set them every Sunday for 23 years. I took off my coat. I folded it over my arm. And then I looked at my son and I said, in the quietest voice I have used in my adult life, "Marcus, I need you to sit back down. There are some things that are going to be explained to you now, and I need you to hear all of them before you say a single word." He said, "Mama, I don't know what you think." I said, "I know about Gerald Tate. I know about the email. I know about the 3 families before me, and I know that the title on this house has been legally protected for 11 days. The room went completely still. He opened his mouth, he closed it. Renee stepped forward and placed a manila folder on the coffee table between us. She did not open it, she just set it there. The sound it made on the wood was very small and very final. I said, "I worked in a law office for 31 years, Marcus. I prepared documents exactly like the ones you tried to get me to sign. Did you forget that? Or did you just decide it didn't matter?" He sat back down. Not because I told him to. Because there was nothing left to do but sit down. I watched something move across his face that I recognized. Not remorse. Not yet. Something that comes before remorse, the specific expression of a person who built their entire plan on one assumption and has just learned that assumption was wrong. He had assumed I did not know what I knew. He had assumed that love made me blind. I picked up my coat from where I had laid it over my arm. I walked to the foot of the stairs. I turned back once and I said, "This is still my house. It will be my house when you are gone from it. I want you to think very carefully tonight about what comes next for you, because the decisions you make in the next 24 hours will matter for a long time." Then I went upstairs. I heard Renee's voice below me, calm and professional, explaining to my son exactly what had been filed, exactly what had been documented, and exactly what Detective Mobley's presence in my living room meant for him going forward. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I looked at my hands in my lap. The radiator clicked once, clicked twice, clicked 3 times, came on. Within 2 hours, Marcus had called a lawyer of his own, a public defender, as it turned out, because he had spent most of his savings in the months he had been living in my house. Detective Mobley had formally documented his statement. Gerald Tate's name had been added to an existing investigation that was already considerably larger than what had been one to my property alone. And I sat in my kitchen, in my good blue dress, and I ate the dinner I had not eaten at noon, and I listened to the house settle around me the way it always had. It was still my house. It had been my house the whole time. Gerald Tate was arrested 4 months after that Sunday morning. The investigation that Detective Mobley's unit had already been building expanded significantly once my documentation and Renee Caldwell's filings were added to it. What prosecutors ultimately assembled involved 7 families across 3 counties in northeastern Ohio. 7 families, 7 homes, 7 older adults who had been identified, targeted, and systematically maneuvered toward losing the most significant thing they owned. Arlene Moss, the woman from the east side who had already lost her home of 22 years, was one of the 7. Her case became central to the prosecution because it was the most complete. The transfer had gone all the way through, the property had been sold, and the paper trail was unambiguous. Gerald Tate was convicted on 4 counts of real estate fraud and 2 counts of elder financial exploitation in October of the following year. He was sentenced to 6 to 9 years in Cuyahoga County. The sentencing document, which Renee sent me a copy of, listed the names of all 7 families on page 3. I read every one of them. As for Marcus, my son, my only child, the man who sat in his father's chair and made his plan, he was charged with 1 count of attempted property fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He accepted a plea agreement. He received 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent notation in the county property records system that flags his name in connection with the case. He did not go to prison. I want to be honest with you about how I feel about that. I am still working through how I feel about that. But I will tell you this. The morning after the plea was entered, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, 3 pages from Marcus. I read it once. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I have not read it again. Not yet. Some things need more time than other things, and I have decided to give this one the time it needs. What I will not do is pretend the damage was smaller than it was. He tried to take my house. The house I paid for. The house his father and I built a life inside of. That is not a thing that dissolves because a letter arrives in the mail. But neither is it a thing that gets to take anything else from me. 8 months after that Sunday, my life looks different in ways I am still noticing. The first thing I did, the week after Marcus moved out, was have the bay window in the front room reglazed. It had had a slow draft for 3 winters, and I had kept saying I would get to it. I got to it. The man who did the work said the original glass was from 1962 and asked if I wanted to keep it original or upgrade. I said keep it original. He said good choice. That window now holds the cold outside where it belongs, and in the mornings when the early light comes through it, the whole front room turns a particular shade of gold that I had not seen clearly in years because I had stopped sitting in that room. I sit in it now, every morning, in Reginald's chair. My sister-in-law Paulette, Reginald's younger sister, had pulled back from me in the 2 years Marcus was living in the house. I had not fully understood why until afterward, when she told me that Marcus had told her more than once that I was becoming forgetful, that I was having trouble managing things on my own, that the family should be mindful of that. She had believed him, at least partway, because she had no reason not to. When she learned the truth, she drove from Akron on a Saturday morning and sat in my kitchen for 4 hours, and we talked in the way that 2 women who have both loved and lost the same man, her brother, my husband, can talk when there is finally nothing left to hide. We speak every Sunday evening now. She calls me first, without fail, at 7 o'clock. And for myself, I have started doing something I had not done in many years, which is keeping a journal. Not for anyone else, not to record events, just to write down, in my own handwriting, what I observe and what I think and what I know. There is something about seeing your own thoughts in your own hand that makes them harder to talk yourself out of. I wish I had started years earlier. I write in it every night before I sleep, and what I write most often is some version of the same sentence. I was right. I knew. I listened to myself. Those 6 words are more valuable to me now than almost anything else I own. About 5 months after everything settled, I was at Greater Harvest on a Wednesday evening for Bible study, and afterward a woman I knew only slightly. Her name is Bernadette. She sits 3 rows ahead of me on the left side, came up to me in the parkin. G-Lot. She had heard some of what had happened, the way things travel in a congregation. She did not ask me details. She just stood there in the cold parking lot air under the yellow overhead light, and she said, very quietly, "My daughter has been asking me to sign things, and I keep signing them because she's my daughter and I don't want to think what I've been thinking." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "What does the thing you've been thinking tell you?" She said, "That something is wrong." I said, "Then something is wrong, and you already knew that before you asked me." She called Renee Caldwell's office the following week. I do not know everything that came of it, but I know that 2 months later, Bernadette stopped me after Sunday service and squeezed my hand without saying a word. And the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who still has what is hers. That meant more to me than I know how to say in this format. Here is what I learned, and I am not going to give it to you as a list because it is not a list. It is a shape. It is connected. The first thing I learned is that I had spent years being proud of my knowledge, 31 years in a law office. I knew documents, I knew process, and still I nearly missed it. because knowledge is not the same as permission. I knew what those papers meant, but I had not given myself permission to believe that my own son would use them against me. I kept translating what I saw through the filter of who I hoped he was instead of who he was showing me he was. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is the very human cost of love. But I want you to hear me when I say, love is not the same as blindness. You can love someone fully and still see them clearly. In fact, that is the only kind of love that actually protects you. The second thing is this: do not wait for certainty before you protect yourself. I went to Renee when I had a photograph of one email and a feeling that had been living in my chest for 6 weeks. I did not have proof of everything. I had enough. A feeling that something is wrong in your own home, with your own property, with your own name, that feeling is data. It is not paranoia. It is your own mind doing its job, and it deserves to be taken seriously before the situation requires something more drastic than a filing and a conversation. What I wish someone had told me sooner is that asking for help is not the same as being helpless. I drove to Renee's office on a Sunday afternoon and sat in her waiting room for 40 minutes, and I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I needed help with something that was happening in my own house. That embarrassment nearly cost me the house itself. There is no version of this story in which I should have waited longer or figured it out more quietly or handled it more privately. The right thing to do was exactly what I did, and the only thing I would change is doing it 3 weeks sooner. If you are listening to this and something in this story felt familiar, if there is a document you have signed without fully reading, a conversation you have been explaining away, a feeling that keeps returning no matter how many times you set it aside, I am asking you to take that feeling seriously today. Not tomorrow. Today. You do not need to be certain. You do not need to have all the evidence. You just need one trusted person and a willingness to say out loud, something is not right. That is enough to begin. Has someone close to you ever made you feel confused about something you actually understood clearly? If this story made you think of someone in your life who needs to hear it, please share it with her today. A mother, a sister, an aunt, a friend who you know is dealing with something she has not named yet. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to know where you are listening from, because these stories are happening everywhere, and knowing you are out there matters. And thank you not just for watching, but for staying all the way to the end, because that tells me you understood that this story was worth your full attention. It was. You were right to stay.